call me the greatest titan who ever lived.
Hold up. Hang on. Oh, you just wait a frickin' minute now. Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard Grizzly, and consider the following. Saint-14 is dead on arrival. I know, crazy to think about, but this also may not be the last time he comes back to us. Saint-14 as a whole is already turning into a weird and slightly problematic character, but his coming back makes a fair bit of sense to a degree. Perfect Paradox's lore tab goes on to explain why, and of course there are other pieces that I need to get you prepped for once Tuesday hits. That's an important goal as we get ready for the storytelling aspects of Season of Dawn. I voiced something about this earlier which I didn't produce, but I feel like we have most of the pieces in place per this point, with Weblore and all of that, and the 30-minute short live stream that was that live stream. I don't even know what it was, honestly. Anyway, let's get into it. Before we really get going, at the time of writing, I'm unsure if this is all of the Weblore that we have. It's kind of open to interpretation with how the last one went. I'll try to add something if there's some clarifications to this rambling within this video, or something else I can add overall to the discussion if we get any more. Worst case scenario, I'll pull the video down, but I don't think I'll end up doing that all the same. Just for clarification, Bungie has released the entry Actions of Mutual Friends so far, along with 3 other entries before that. First off, let me go over what's probably important to know with Season of Dawn before I get into my major contentions with the points presented so far, and why they just fail to stick with information we have currently, at least to a large or small degree, depending on your perspective and outlook. Also, a rather major mad moment I have about a certain fallen house, but I won't get ahead of myself. First off, the characters. Briefly, you'll have Osiris, Saint-14, and Ikora to be mindful of and talk with throughout this season. I am sure that Zavala and Shax and Drifter and all the others will have a few things to say about Saint-14's return, at the least, but Ikora and Osiris, especially, have their history together. And I'm sure that Osiris is going to poke fun at Ikora for a rather large amount of this season for ordering us to smack around of X-Mind. Again, for another lot of times. Because we didn't do it in D1 at all or anything. Oh no, nope, only this time does dropping the Undying Mind actually matter. Makes total sense. So, that business aside, recall the events of Curse of Osiris for a moment. We arrive on Mercury. We find out about Osiris being stuck inside the Infinite Forest by his own hand, because someone must always fight the Vex, and we recover Sagira, Osiris' ghost, which ends up taking over our own ghost. Something about overwriting memories and all that, which, overwriting programs, maybe? Anyway, makes me wonder how Saint-14's ghost is going to be by the by, and how it might be if we talk to him. Would his ghost be chaotic evil, with Saint being lawful good? That'd be fun, considering most Guardian-Ghost relationships are kind of opposite to each other. Mostly. Anyway, we battle the Vex, take down Panoptes, who was apparently at the heart of the forest, at least, and possibly more than that, but since we don't know enough about Vex structure, we simply don't know what that means for us, so it's any man's guess. Yeah, we destroy a Vex mind, and it seems like it's staying down for good. But what about other events of Curse of Fail? So, jeez, Beard, come on, man. Let it go. Alright, Curse of Osiris isn't quite acclaimed, but there was one good part in my mind about it, and that was the weapon grind. I really did enjoy grinding for the weapons, and I'm kind of excited that they actually bring them back a little bit more, that we can play with them here in Year 2 upgrades or whatever, which is technically Year 5 anyway. We learned through this equipment about the fate of Osiris early on with the Vanguard, along with his thoughts that he had on the Vanguard, with some other problems in between it all, thanks to a visual aid that we have. Yes! You hate a Curse of Osiris. Everybody gets it, Beard. It's okay. Let it go, man. It's fine. Well, all but one part. The lore about Saint-14 and the prophecies of Osiris, those are pretty fun and top-notch lore, in my opinion. They outline a few things we hadn't really thought about before, like there being a Terminator-esque situation or character, and the prophecies have changed in interpretation over the course of time, which is what they were structured to do, and that's just absolutely brilliant. The issue stands as to when we'll actually learn about those in full, and if Osiris feels it fun to put any more of these prophecies on our plate, or not with Season of Dawn. Personally, I hope so, because it was the best part of COO, hands down. But I think that about sums up the general nature of things. There was no one else to worry about in Curse of Osiris. Nope, absolutely no one. We can move on and not think about any Vance else. Ah, crap. You know, Vance, you were good for one reason, and that was that you gave me the perfect paradox quest and telling me how to forge the Assyrian weapons. That was your only purpose. Only one. Don't come back, Vance. Ever. Stay out of my mind. And speaking of perfect paradox, if you'd like a more in-depth look into the lore of this weapon, I made something about it a good couple years ago now, about what was going on with the lore tab and how Saint-14 might come back to us at some point, or how we had met him before, so on. That's still up for interpretation, which I'll somewhat get into a very slight bit. I feel like I just need to rewrite that entire episode at this point because of how much that's changed. But let's read the entry all the same. I never found Osiris, but I've killed enough Vex to end a war, and they, in turn, struck a fatal blow. They completed a mind with the sole function to drain the light from me. It worked very well. Don't worry, not that you worry much. It took them centuries to build, keyed to the unique frequency of my light, and I sit atop its shattered husk. I mourn that I will never reach the heights you have. To me, you represent everything a guardian can become. Yours is a thriving city, so different from mine. My whole 14th life I fought to make my city yours, and never finished. All I have left is this weapon. The Cryptarchs say you crafted it yourself, built it out of scraps and light and sheer will, inside the infinite forge. I'll make sure it finds its way back to you. When you gave it to me, I swore I would make it my duty to follow your example. I'm still trying. Saint-14. Again, if you would like some details on my full thoughts with this entry, even though those have kind of changed with new information a bit, then check that other video as I mentioned. Otherwise, I want to focus on a particular point here made relevant by Saint-14 himself. To reread it, and they, in turn, struck a fatal blow. They completed a mind with the sole function to drain the light from me. It worked very well. Don't worry, not that you worry much. It took them centuries to build, keyed to the unique frequency of my light, and I sit atop its shattered husk. So, here's the issue, if you haven't pieced it together yet. The Vex work in concert with each other. The Vex can also pass information back and forth with each other. Over time, they were able to find Saint-14's light signature. Though this event itself didn't deliver his final death, the eventuality that Saint-14 would die at the hands of the Vex inside of the forest again was a very real possibility. It could have also been that, as mentioned within some of the later Weblore though, that they did actually strip his light entirely, and that also stripped his life entirely. Saint makes no mention of his ghosts, but like Eris, I have this feeling it was a similar situation, where she also lost her ghost, and thus her light. This goes along in tandem with a theory I've had about guardians and their use of the light in the way they are able, as ghosts act more as a resonator or focus for guardians' powers. Without it, they cannot use the light to the intensity that they are able to. I think this is made more factual by our connection to the Traveler in Destiny 2 Vanilla, but anyway, I'm slightly off track here, but it still kind of, I think, ties back to Saint-14's light and how it was stripped from him and so on. This goes back to my somewhat opening statement. Saint-14 is a dead man walking. The Vex already know about the frequency of his light, and unless it is somehow changed, his personal light code is changed, and it's even able to be changed in some way. Then the Vex already have the ultimate answer to how to destroy Saint-14. It really makes him a non-issue for the Vex. Obviously, there are ways that this can be written out through the story to counteract this point, which could be explained in Season of Dawn, to be completely fair. They could be pieces like the rewrite of the Vex in this timeline, or others has caused erasure of information for the Vex in some way, or this isn't really our Saint-14, or Saint-14 is still only a simulation, which can't be true because we see Saint use a Sentinel shield and the Vex can't simulate paracausal powers, i.e. our supers or much else that we otherwise use. There's other options, but those are a few. It can be written around, but it needs to be explained. That's my point. So, to introduce Saint-14 now is a bit problematic within the writing. It will take a lot of convincing for me to allow his resurrection and to not really harp on it any more than I already am, or whatever Osiris wants to call this per this time. And I certainly hope that the writing team, passionate as they are about Saint-14, can explain this revival away without the Vex simply knowing his light pattern and simply blowing it away again. To some degree, the Vex respected Saint-14 enough to give him a burial chamber, a memorial. To what degree or reason is unknown. Now, again, this is just headcanon, this is just perspective talking, and ultimately, I need to remember, while keeping my passions governed, that this is all it is. Perspective. Perspective is the name of the game with the writing team. It's the name of interpretation of lore in any degree and right, and how it's delivered to us. But this doesn't mean we can't look at the contradictions that have come from the writing team and hope for clarification, as we've had before. And as always, let's do it in a civil manner. Even at my worst, I'd like to think myself a bit better off about holding discourse and discussion of elements I don't agree with better than others. But that's my bias talking. For instance, that bias causes me to be riled up about little things at times. I picked on my buddy TheGammaTrap for his amazing artwork that he did of Saint-14, for instance, about how the pump for perfect paradox isn't quite right. But in reality, I still know it is amazing work, and no one in their right mind would say otherwise. But I'll still pick on him for it, and he'll rightly ignore me for being a terrible friend. Thought it would be worth outlining where my head goes for those unfamiliar. Also, it's a joke, so have a giggle. But this moment with Saint-14's light being drawn from the Vex mind, or martyr mind as Osiris seems to have put it within the recent Weblore, is not the only thing that bugs me. This point springs up in 2 entries, and it's one that drives me a little batty, to be honest. The first time it pops up is in the entry entitled The Accolade, and it talks about a certain set of weapons, the breaking of the weapons of rain. Now, in this context, we don't have anything to really go by with it. There was talk of acid rain within this entry, and for there to be acid rain post-Traveler doesn't really make a ton of sense from what we know about the Traveler's abilities to help in ecosystem regeneration of planets that it does touch. If this was a part of it, then it would make sense. But it wasn't until the entry The Sundial that it took full meaning. An echo spies Saint from a vantage point on the high plains of the Fields of Glass. The Titan fights for his life against purple-bannered Fallen, bearing the same symbol as modern Dusk soldiers. They are the House of Rain, the lowest house. The burning camp around them is curiously absent of bodies, but Osiris has heard Saint tell this story before. One of Saint's first missions for the Speaker brought him to Mercury in a failed attempt to retake that planet for humanity. They had not known in that time that the Vex had already started to transform the Garden world into a machine. House Rain followed Saint's jump ship and waited till the expedition had made camp. Then the Fallen annihilated the colonists Saint was charged to protect and beat him to within an inch of his life. I'm gonna stop reading there, but I do want to come back to this for another point. 2 mistakes, or seemingly mistakes, within one paragraph. The House of Rain is a fallen house that Varix outlines for us in a few conversations, especially through Destiny 1. You could be forgiven for not knowing much about them, as it was a house that fell to the Whirlwind, an event that caused the collapse of the Elixni or Fallen people. It was very similar to how our own collapse happened, and the warlords of our time as Guardians are a direct and general showcase of how our people mimic the Fallen, and of course to their Kells and Captains. Power was still the name of the game, and so on for either case. But regardless, to Varric's beliefs and his records, The House of Rain died with the coming of the whirlwind. Nothing else had been heard of from this house at all. But here, Saint-14 is seen chopping down members, or kind of more so getting beat up by them, of House Rain on Mercury. And this causes me to question a lot of pieces within established Fallen lore. Yes, this one piece screws a lot of it up. It causes me to question how many other houses there may be outside of Scar, Kings, Devils, Winter, Wolves, and Rain, and how much judgment may have survived outside of Varix, if it did at all. And it equally makes me question anything that Varix may have told us about his people, which was the one factor that caused him to be driven to do what he does now, seeking the mantle of Kell of Kells in House Rain's old prophecy. But it never once was in question that he seemed to lie about the history of his people or what had happened to them. He was very proud and stands very proud of the Elixni. That's the one part that he was always proud of. But to go into all of that writing would take me much longer than I'd like to take on this topic, as it's not the point to begin with. The thing that really bugs me about this: what is held sacred within the writings at all? What can I trust at all within the lore if even these details can be drug up whenever they feel like it, placing characters and houses and groups within places they don't seemingly actually go? It would make more sense for a weird group of future war cult to appear on Mercury than for House Rain, and that still doesn't make a ton of sense, actually almost no sense whatsoever. I can offer up a couple explanations, of course. The vision of Osiris that viewed this fight between Saint-14 and the House of Rain had no idea that the timelines were being altered or had altered by our destroying of the Undying Mind. But if the story that Saint-14 told Osiris within our timeline, while he was physically in front of Saint-14, was also of House of Rain beating him up, then this can't be the case. Thus, this option is pretty well thrown out the window almost immediately. It could be that Varix is incorrect, and a few members of the House of Rain survived. He could also be harboring them, or trying to help them survive, which wouldn't be completely out of the ground of possibility, but also highly unlikely given his status as House Judgment and his want to stay low. Skull has let him operate within House of Wolves, but only just. That still would be a questionable item for why Rain were attacking colonist outposts on Mercury, even if it was an expedition and just a means to salvage a craft that they could use and not knowing a Guardian was on board, or making their presence known much at all. It could be a sign and general show of force to say that there is more of House of Rain hanging around, a lot more than we think. Or that could also have just been their last bastion. It also applies back to my old theory that was written about the Fallen languages and how House Rain is honored within the new banner for the Fallen in House of Dusk. But that's tooting my own horn and thinking a bit too far, and it's still theory, but it's still a fun one. It could also just be a major mistake, and something that the writer in question of the entry completely forgot about. And that's why I want to make this criticism to begin with. While options exist to counteract and say that the Fallen had no idea House Rain existed again, there was one way they could have written this to not throw Fallen lore, Varix words, and so much else into general question. Instead of making it House Rain, make it House Scar. With Taniks the Scarred still within our system, it would have actually been an incredible way to label and put in some level of vengeance for the character, for wanting to avenge the last of his house after Saint-14 killed them all off. Albeit in self-defense and human population in himself, but it would have been motivation regardless. It would have made a lot more sense and track easier than what we have with House of Rain, given current information. I'll keep these on screen, but these are the prophecies that House Rain had about Kell of Kells. Along with that, I'll keep up the entry from the Kell of Kells mission card from House of Wolves as well. This is where the vast majority of House Rain information comes from. I'm sure there are other points, but within written word, this is it. Just about. There's a couple other entries that mimic similar language like this, but this is about it. Before I get to my reason for all of this and my ultimate message back to the writers or whoever else really wants to listen to this, if anyone at all, I want to touch base on the other item that bugs me a bit from this entry. So back to that for a minute. One of Saint's first missions for the Speaker brought him to Mercury in a failed attempt to retake that planet for humanity. They had not known at the time that the Vex had already started to transform the Garden world into a machine. House Rain followed Saint's jump ship and waited till the expedition had made camp. Then the Fallen annihilated the colonists Saint was charged to protect and beat him to within an inch of his life. The Echo lives that story firsthand now, and finds himself looking away at the terraformed vegetation at his feet instead. It's already half machine, grass and metal blades growing beside each other under his boots. A ketch roars down from the sky and rains heavy munitions on the battlefield, and the Echo's vantage point fills with rolling clouds of dust. The Echo takes his leave. He's seen enough. Needed to go backwards a bit to highlight this in full, but I'll give you a second to think over before I give you the piece that bugs me the most from this point.
The more we learn about the Vex, the more I understand why our exo-friend is so worried about them. During the collapse, they transformed the planet Mercury into a machine in days. They would have spread to every planet if the Traveler hadn't stopped them. We need to get into the Black Garden. We need a Gate Lord's head.
As a reminder, this is from a Gate Lord's Eye mission in Destiny 1. Ghost is under the impression, with records, supposedly, that Mercury was machinoformed by the Vex within days. How many days? That's unknown. If I had to venture a guess, considering all the connotations of late, I'd say 7, but on the 7th day the Vex rested. See what I did there? Also, another really well done scene, or probably one of the best well done scenes out of Curse of Osiris, was when we went back to Mercury's past, and we saw the Traveler hanging above Mercury. So that also calls to question when the Vex started to machinoform Mercury, along with when the Traveler may have stopped them from doing so. The implication is twofold. The Traveler made it so the Vex couldn't machinoform Mercury while its presence was felt in the system, and when it went dormant they were able to. But it throws up a red flag thanks to when Saint-14 is on Mercury, as the collapse would have happened sometime after the city began to build up, and that wasn't a good while after the collapse hit humanity. We needed a speaker, Saint-14, Ikora, and so on. And from those moments, along with Osiris claiming this was when he was Vanguard Commander, and when Saint-14 worked with the Speaker after the Battle of Six Fronts at least, well, you can see there's a whole lot of time for this to not work so well, and for the building of the machinoform planet of Mercury to be happening so suddenly over that battle period, after the Battle of Six Fronts, just doesn't work so well. What would cause the Vex to wait so long to machinoform Mercury after the Traveler went dormant? And after arriving in our system at the time the Traveler was finishing its work on Mercury, if that is indeed the implication from this scene. It's the little things that matter. When logic throws up paths that don't make sense in either direction, I have to question the logic path of the writer as well, without further clarity. But this moment already has quite a bit of time that's open to interpretation, and it could just be a matter of clarification that we seek. But that one's gonna take a lot of clarification to make sense, if you want my honest opinion. This is just a continued highlight of that same thing I've touched on already, and the piece of the Fallen lore highlights it just as much. Again, what exactly is held sacred within the writings of the lore? Between these examples, the thoughts that ghosts can only be destroyed by only ontological weapons like that of a thorn shot or similar, while we see Fellwinter shotgun warlords and ghosts down, which contradicts that notion, with how Brother Vance was handled and how the perspective of the Cult of Osiris shifted so heavily from game to game. The aesthetic just isn't there for them anymore. From the entries on Curse of Osiris not jiving with the comic almost at all, which is also considered canon for the games. Heck, even though I understand it and agree with it now, but the thought of there being multiple war minds originally from Destiny 1 and how that just isn't the case anymore. Again, I simply ask what is held in sacred place for the story and lore of this game. What universal background is there? And are any of you on the same page? If nothing, then fine. I'll continue to try and roll with the punches. I'll continue to have my hot take, sure, but I'll try to keep everything within understanding that it is just a game, and at the end of the day it really doesn't matter. But that does kinda suck, and if that's the reasoning, it's not really fair to the fanbase or theorists at all. But I know for a fact that the writing team at Bungie doesn't consider it just another game, and not mattering at all. There are smatterings all over this lore that suggest there is heart here, there is passion, there is suggestion and understanding of a larger universe. But even small details are enough to throw things completely out of focus. I know for a fact, from talking with a few of the writers, even a little, they do not consider it just another game. These characters are part of them. It's obvious. At the end of the day, the House Reign thing really isn't that large of a deal if I take it as a one-off instance. If we see more of them, then it becomes questionable. Then it's more of a pattern. If they are, in fact, the leaders and organizers of House Dusk, then it becomes much, much more important. It calls question to several pieces of Fallen lore, along with Uldren and House of Dusk as well, which we already have established, but just going a little further. If the issues with Saint-14's story and the process of his light being taken away by the Vex is explained and figured out, then hey, cool, that works. There is another way that we could see Saint-14 come back again, however, especially considering some writing in The Accolade, and I still hold true to the time traveler idea. I might just need to revisit that theory, like I mentioned before. This is already dragging on way too long, but we'll see if it's explained any more in Season of the Dawn or not, and see if it does require a heavy revision. I do hope for something good from Season of Dawn. Saint-14 and Osiris are really, really cool characters within the lore of Destiny. I would like to see both of them fleshed out more, and to Osiris given a second chance to shine. Within timelines being a major focus on this season as well, and knowing someone that's written the world lines already, well, this could be a fair bit of fun. But I do still worry for it. I do still worry over the direction of the content in this direction as a whole. I hope to see things refined, revised, and clarified, not muddied and unclear, not in shambles, with meta and other changes still up in the air quite a bit if I talk about gameplay even a little bit. Story is certainly one piece of this game, and Bife, Mylan, and other channels are proof. There's a voracious section of this community that wants more from the story. We want more clarity. We want to experience and hear more of the tales of Destiny, and not just of our Guardians either. Some of the most interesting tales never dealt with Guardians at all, in fact. But for those that love the gameplay, and I know this doesn't really have to do with this video, but I hope there are solid changes in place for you as well. Traveler knows you need them. My call is simple. Take care in the details. The fans have a site that you can use just as much as we do, Bungie. IshtarCollective.net is there for you as much as for us. I mean, it uses your API and it has plenty of things that are even deleted from what you had in the game prior, so just saying, it's easy to reference. But I'm sure you use it and you do reference it often. And I know the ails of a failing memory, as I'm already 33, of course, at this point, and my mind's already going, I get it. I know this background is vast, but if I can point something out that may have been missed, I will do so in an effort for clarity. Not to ask for your jobs, not to push you down, never that. I am not a writer. I don't claim to be able or could ever think to do what you envision and think of. I don't have the imagination for that. I'm an analyst, and I will always give my perspective of the story you've given when I can. But now, the ball's in your court, my fellow lore lover. You've gotten this far, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below on Saint-14, the implications of House of Rain, or really anything else that could be linked to Season of Dawn, or otherwise. Whatever's on your mind. If you'd like to counter what I've said here, then I'm open to hear it. After all, your thoughts and perspective are just as important and noted as mine. From a personal note, this past week has me questioning my position again. Thankfully, each time that this seems to happen, it's become easier and easier to get over the hurdle. I know I'm not alone with these thoughts that I have, either on the game or whatever else it might be that I suffer from. I only hope I do these thoughts enough justice that you understand where I'm coming from, at least, even if you don't agree with it. While I'm riding this wave, I'd always rather speak my mind than I would bottle it in. I feel I need to do that more often, within reason. To those I've hurt or offended over the past week, I'm sorry, but know the distance has done me good, mild as it truly may have been. Anyway, thanks for listening to my ramblings, and I'll see you in Season of Dawn. We've got some timelines to fix up. To all of you, no matter when or where you are, I'll see you next space time. Take care.